Elena, I brought you something. Victoria's voice cut through the quiet hum of the university library. She slid into the chair across from me, her designer bag making barely a whisper against the mahogany table. I looked up from my linguistics textbook, already feeling that familiar knot of unease. Whenever Victoria appeared with that particular smile, 3 years of being roommates had taught me to recognize her expressions. This one meant trouble. "What is it?" I asked, closing my book but keeping my finger as a bookmark. The scholarship interview was tomorrow morning, and I still had 2 chapters of comparative mythology to review. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Not just any envelope. This one was made of thick, cream-coloured paper that looked ancient. The kind of stationery that belonged in museums, not student backpacks. "My grandmother passed away last month," she said, her voice taking on that soft, caring tone she used whenever she wanted something. "While cleaning out her things, I found this letter. It has your name on it." My blood went cold. "My name?" She turned the envelope toward me, and there it was, written in flowing script across the front. Elena Vasquez. But that wasn't what made my heart stop. It was the seal, a black wax impression of a 7-pointed star surrounded by symbols I recognized from my ancient languages research. "That's impossible," I whispered, taking the letter with trembling hands. "Your grandmother never met me." Victoria shrugged, but I caught the flash of something darker in her eyes. "Maybe it's fate. Maybe she knew you'd be important to someone in our family someday." She paused, then added with false casualness, "You should read it." She always said her letters had a way of bringing people exactly what they needed. The envelope felt warm. Too warm. As if something alive pulsed within it. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to run, to never open whatever lay inside. But Victoria was watching me with such intensity that I knew refusing would only make things worse. I broke the seal. The letter unfolded itself in my hands, the parchment crackling like old bones. The text was written in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and something much, much older, something that made the air around us grow thick and oppressive. "To the vessel of borrowed light, your time of reckoning has come. 33 days from the breaking of this seal, your flame shall be extinguished, your achievement shall be forfeit, your place shall be taken by she who deserves it. May your suffering be swift, may your regrets be endless, may your legacy die with you." The words began to glow with a sickly green light burning themselves into my vision. Pain lanced through my skull as the curse took hold, wrapping around my life force like iron chains. I could feel it already beginning its work, a slow, methodical drain that would leave me a withered corpse in exactly 33 days. Victoria leaned forward, her mask of concern slipping just enough to reveal the malicious satisfaction beneath. "Are you all right, Elena? You look pale." I stared at her, understanding flooding through me like ice water. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fate. Victoria had orchestrated this entire thing. Somehow she had gotten her hands on a genuine death curse, and she was using it to eliminate her competition for the Blackthorn scholarship. The scholarship interview was tomorrow. In 33 days I would be dead, and Victoria would be on her way to Oxford with my research, my achievements, and my future. "I'm fine," I managed to say, carefully refolding the letter. "Thank you for bringing this to me." Victoria's smile widened. "Of course, what are friends for?" That night, I lay in my dorm bed feeling the curse work its way through my system like poison. My life force was being slowly siphoned away, feeding whatever dark entity had been bound to that letter. By morning, I could already feel the weakness setting in. The scholarship interview was a disaster. I couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. The words I'd spent years perfecting came out jumbled and weak. Professor Martinez, who had been my mentor and strongest supporter, looked disappointed and concerned. "Elena, are you feeling well?" This isn't like you at all." Victoria, who had interviewed an hour before me, squeezed my shoulder sympathetically as we left the building. "Don't worry, Elena. I'm sure you did better than you think." But I knew better. I had just watched my future die. The curse worked exactly as intended. Day by day, I grew weaker. My grades plummeted. My research became incomprehensible gibberish. My professors began to whisper about academic burnout, about the pressures of competition finally breaking me. Victoria, meanwhile, flourished. She suddenly had insights into ancient languages that rivaled my years of study. Her papers became brilliant overnight. Her professors spoke of her as the next great linguistic mind. She was stealing more than my life. She was stealing my very essence, my knowledge, my capabilities. On day 32, I collapsed in the library, the same library where she had given me the letter. As the paramedics carried me away, I saw Victoria watching from the second floor, her face carefully arranged in an expression of shock and grief. On day 33, I died. The heart monitor's flat line was the last sound I heard before the world went black. Victoria's face was the last thing I saw, standing in the hospital doorway, wearing that same sweet smile while my life ebbed away. Then I opened my eyes to Victoria's voice calling my name. "Elena, I brought you something." I was back in the library, back at the mahogany table, back to the moment it all began. The linguistics textbook was open in front of me, my finger still marking the page on comparative mythology. Victoria was sliding into the chair across from me, her designer bag whispering against the wood. But this time, I knew exactly what she was planning. This time, I smiled back. "What is it?" I asked again, but this time the words carried a different weight. I had lived this moment before, died from it, but somehow, impossibly, I was here again. Victoria reached for her purse, exactly as she had before. "My grandmother passed away last month." While she spoke, I tested my memories against reality. Yes, she would mention cleaning out her grandmother's things. Yes, she would claim the letter had my name on it. Yes, she would use that particular tone of false sympathy. But there was something else now, something that hadn't been there in my first life. A warmth spreading from somewhere deep inside my chest, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It felt ancient, familiar, as if something that had been sleeping was finally waking up. "It has your name on it." Victoria turned the envelope toward me, and there was my name in flowing script. But this time I saw more than just the 7-pointed star seal. I saw the binding sigils around the edges, the way the ink seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at it. I saw the layers of dark magic woven into the very paper. Most importantly, I saw how amateur it all was. "That's impossible," I said, playing my part while my mind raced. "Your grandmother never met me." But as I took the envelope, I felt that warmth in my chest pulse stronger. The symbols on the seal weren't just familiar, they were responding to me. The 7-pointed star began to glow faintly, so faintly that Victoria couldn't see it. But I could feel it recognizing something in me, something Victoria had never suspected. "Maybe it's fate," she continued, right on schedule. "Maybe she knew you'd be important to someone in our family someday. You should read it. She always said her letters had a way of bringing people exactly what they needed." I broke the seal, and the letter unfolded itself with that same bone-dry, crackling sound. The text appeared in its 3 languages, the curse beginning to activate as the words glowed green. "To the vessel of borrowed light, your time of reckoning has come. But this time, as the curse tried to latch onto my life force, something extraordinary happened. The warmth in my chest flared like a bonfire, and suddenly I could see the curse for what it really was, a clumsy, desperate attempt at blood magic performed by someone with barely enough knowledge to be dangerous. The green glow faltered. The words on the page began to flicker, Victoria leaned forward with that same mask of false concern. "Are you all right, Elena? You look pale." I raised my eyes to meet hers, and for just a moment, I let my smile become something else entirely, something that made her lean back in her chair. "I'm perfectly fine," I said, my voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the ancient stone of the library walls. "In fact, I've never been better." The curse was still trying to work, sending tendrils of dark energy toward my life force. But instead of draining me, something inside me was devouring it, converting the malevolent energy into pure power that fed that growing warmth in my chest. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. "Thank you for bringing this to me," I continued, carefully refolding the letter. "It's exactly what I needed." That night, alone in my dorm room, I finally understood what was happening to me. The memories of my death were real. I had died, just as the curse intended. But death, it seemed, wasn't the end of my story. I sat cross-legged on my bed and closed my eyes, focusing on that warm presence that had awakened when the curse tried to claim me. Slowly, carefully, I reached deeper into my own consciousness than I had ever gone before. And there, buried beneath 20 years of human memories, I found the truth. Images flashed through my mind like lightning, a realm of silver light and crystal spires, beings of pure energy moving between dimensions, a great war that had raged across multiple planes of existence. I saw myself, not as Elena Vasquez, struggling linguistics student, but as something far older and far more powerful. I was Celestine, guardian of the seventh seal, protector of the mortal realm. I had been sent to Earth not as punishment, but as protection. My true memories had been locked away, my power suppressed, my identity hidden even from myself. Until Victoria's pathetic little death curse had tried to kill me, and accidentally triggered my awakening instead. I laughed, actually laughed, as the full irony hit me. Victoria Chen, jealous roommate and amateur practitioner of black magic, had just awakened one of the most powerful beings in the supernatural hierarchy. She had literally handed a death curse to someone whose job it was to destroy cursed objects and protect mortals from exactly this kind of threat. But there was more. As my memories continued to return, I saw the larger picture. Victoria wasn't working alone. The curse letter hadn't come from her grandmother's estate. It had come from Professor Harrison, the ancient studies department head who had always favoured Victoria despite her mediocre work. Professor Harrison, who wore a ring bearing the same 7-pointed star that had been on the letter's seal. Professor Harrison, who had been slowly building a collection of cursed objects and students desperate enough to use them. Professor Harrison, who was tomorrow's scholarship interview panel chairman, and who had already decided Victoria would win, one way or another. I stood up and walked to my mirror. My reflection looked the same. Dark hair, brown eyes, the face of Elena Vasquez, unremarkable linguistics student. But now I could see the power thrumming just beneath my skin, could see the way reality bent slightly around me when I wasn't trying to hide what I was. Tomorrow's interview was going to be very different from my first life. But first, I had a visit to make. I found Victoria in the 24-hour study lounge on the 3rd floor, exactly where I knew she would be. She was hunched over her laptop, probably writing the acceptance speech she was so sure she'd get to give. "Working late?" I asked, sliding into the chair beside her. She looked up, startled. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, I could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. Using that curse letter had cost her more than she'd expected. "Oh, Eleanor, I didn't see you there." She quickly minimised her laptop screen, but not before I caught a glimpse of what she'd been writing. Not a speech, an email to someone named H, with the subject line, "It's done." "I wanted to thank you again for the letter," I said, keeping my voice light and friendly. You have no idea how much it's changed things for me. Victoria's smile faltered. Changed things? Oh, yes. I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be. I leaned closer, and this time I didn't bother hiding the otherworldly quality in my voice. Tell me, Victoria, how much do you really know about your grandmother's collection? Her face went white. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't. I reached out and gently touched the back of her hand. She jerked away as if I'd burned her, and, in a way, I had. My touch carried just enough celestial energy to show her exactly what she was dealing with. Sleep well, Victoria, I said, standing up. Big day tomorrow. I left her there, staring after me with growing terror in her eyes. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The morning of the scholarship interview arrived with unseasonable storm clouds gathering over the university. I woke before dawn, feeling the electric charge in the air respond to my presence. My celestial nature was becoming harder to suppress, reality bending around me like water around a stone. I dressed carefully, the same conservative blazer and skirt I'd worn in my first life, but now they felt like armour. In the mirror, Elena Vasquez looked back at me, but behind my eyes burned the ancient power of Celestine, guardian of the seventh seal. Victoria was already gone when I checked our room, probably meeting with Professor Harrison for last-minute coaching. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. I arrived at the Blackthorn building an hour early and used the time to investigate. My recovered memories included abilities I'd forgotten I possessed, like the power to read the psychic impressions left on objects by those who handled them. The conference room where the interviews would be held reeked of dark magic. Professor Harrison had been here many times, always carrying cursed objects. I could see the shadowy traces of his work, binding spells woven into the very walls, surveillance enchantments hidden in the corners, and most disturbing of all, influence magic designed to cloud the judgment of the other panel members. This wasn't just about Victoria winning the scholarship. Harrison was collecting promising students for something much larger. I placed my hand on the conference table and let my senses expand. Images flashed through my mind. Other students who had sat in this room, other interviews that had gone wrong. Sarah Chen, who had been the top candidate 2 years ago but had suddenly withdrawn her application after meeting with Harrison privately. Marcus Webb, who had died in a car accident the day before his interview 3 years ago. Jennifer Liu, who had simply vanished from campus entirely. All of them had been competitors for the same scholarship. All of them had possessed the kind of brilliant minds that Harrison seemed to covet. And now I understood why. Harrison wasn't just collecting cursed objects. He was collecting souls, binding the essence of gifted students to power his ascension to something beyond human. Victoria was just his latest apprentice, and I was meant to be his latest victim. But Harrison had made one critical error. He had no idea what I really was. I was examining the binding spell woven into the table when the door opened behind me. "Miss Vasquez, you're quite early." I turned to see Professor Martinez, my linguistics mentor, entering with a steaming cup of coffee and a concerned expression. In my first life, he had been disappointed by my poor interview performance. This time, I was determined things would be different. "Professor Martinez, I wanted to review my notes one more time." He smiled and took a seat across from me. "Elena, I have to ask, are you feeling all right? You seemed unwell yesterday, and Victoria mentioned you'd been under a lot of stress." Of course, Victoria had mentioned it. She was already laying the groundwork for my expected failure. "Actually, I feel better than I have in years," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Like, I'm finally seeing things clearly." Professor Martinez studied my face for a moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. He was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. "Elena," he said quietly, "has anyone given you anything recently? Any Gifts or letters from unexpected sources? My blood chilled. Did he know about the curse? Was he part of Harrison's network? I reached out with my newfound senses, reading the psychic impressions around him. What I found surprised me. Professor Martinez was clean, no trace of dark magic, no connection to Harrison's schemes. But there was something else, concern, suspicion, and a protective instinct focused directly on me. "Why do you ask?" I said carefully. He looked around the room, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Because you're not the first promising student to suddenly seem different before one of these interviews. And the others." He shook his head. "Let's just say their stories didn't end well." So Martinez knew something was wrong. This could be useful. "What do you know about Professor Harrison?" I asked. Martinez's expression darkened. More than I'd like to, and not nearly enough to stop him. "Elena, listen to me carefully. If you have any reason to believe someone has tried to harm you, any reason at all, we need to get you away from here immediately." Before I could respond, the door opened again, and Professor Harrison himself entered. He was a tall, gaunt man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. The 7-pointed star ring glinted on his finger, and the air around him practically hummed with dark energy. "Ah, Elena," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "How wonderful to see you looking so vibrant this morning." His eyes met mine, and I saw the exact moment he realized something was wrong. The curse should have left me weak and disoriented. Instead, I was radiating power that made the fluorescent lights flicker overhead. "Professor Harrison," I replied sweetly, "I am so looking forward to our conversation." Martinez looked between us, tension crackling in the air like electricity. "I was just giving Elena some last-minute encouragement," he said. "How thoughtful." Harrison's smile never reached his eyes. "But I think she'll find that today's interview will be quite different from what she expects." The threat was barely veiled. In my first life, I would have been terrified. Now, I felt nothing but anticipation. "I certainly hope so," I said. "I've been preparing for this conversation my entire life." Harrison's eyes narrowed. He knew. Somehow, he knew that his carefully laid trap had failed. But he had no idea just how badly. Other panel members began arriving. Dr. Sarah Kim from the philosophy department, Professor James Wright from ancient history, and Dr. Rebecca Foster from comparative literature. All of them moved with the slightly glassy-eyed expression of people under subtle influence magic. All except Professor Martinez, who kept shooting worried glances between Harrison and me. Victoria arrived last, looking pale and nervous. She avoided my eyes entirely, taking a seat in the corner where she could observe the proceedings. According to the schedule, she had already completed her interview earlier that morning. "Shall we begin?" Harrison said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. The binding spells in the room activated, designed to drain my energy and cloud my thoughts. Instead, they fed my power like kindling thrown on a fire. I took my seat and smiled at the panel. "I'm ready when you are." Harrison opened my file and pretended to review it. "Miss Vasquez, your application is quite impressive, but I understand you've been experiencing some difficulties recently." "On the contrary," I said, my voice carrying just enough otherworldly resonance to make the other panel members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I feel like I'm finally coming into my own." The lights flickered again. One of the fluorescent bulbs made a soft popping sound and went out. Harrison's knuckles went white where he gripped my file. "Perhaps you could tell us about your research into ancient languages." "Of course." I stood up, moving to the whiteboard at the front of the room. "I've been particularly interested in the intersection between linguistic structures and metaphysical reality. For example." I began writing symbols on the board. Not random academic examples, but actual celestial script that pulsed with power as my hand moved. The binding spells woven into the room began to unravel, their energy flowing into the symbols instead of into Harrison's network. These characters appear in numerous ancient texts, I continued, but scholars have always assumed they were purely decorative. In reality, they're functional elements of a much older linguistic system. Professor Martinez leaned forward, genuinely intrigued, despite the supernatural tension in the room. What kind of function? I smiled and added one final symbol to complete the array. Protective functions, primarily, designed to identify and neutralize hostile magical influences. The moment I finished the last stroke, Harrison's influence magic shattered like glass. The other panel members blinked in confusion as their minds cleared for the first time in months. Dr. Kim looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "What? Where are we?" she asked, confused. But Harrison was staring at the symbols on the board with growing horror. He recognized them now, recognized what they meant. "You," he whispered, rising from his chair. "You're one of them." "One of what, Professor?" I asked innocently. Victoria made a small, frightened sound from her corner. The curse letter in her purse was beginning to smoke as the celestial energy in the room overwhelmed its dark magic. Harrison's composure finally cracked. "The Guardians. They said you were all gone, destroyed in the war. They said—" "They lied," I said simply. "We've been here all along, watching, waiting, protecting humanity from people like you." The 7-pointed star ring on his finger began to glow red-hot. He tried to remove it, but it was fused to his flesh now, burning him as the stored dark energy turned against its wielder. "This isn't possible," he gasped. "The binding ritual should have worked. She should be dead." All eyes turned to Victoria, who had gone white as a sheet. Professor Martinez looked between us all, pieces clicking into place. "Elena, what is he talking about?" I never got to answer. Harrison lunged toward a cabinet in the corner of the room, his burned hand reaching for something inside. But I was faster. The game was about to become deadly. Harrison's hand closed around something in the cabinet. A black obsidian dagger covered in the same 7-pointed star symbols as his ring. But as he raised it above his head, my own power exploded outward like a solar flare. I moved faster than human eyes could follow, my hand closing around his wrist before the blade could complete its arc. Where my skin touched his, celestial fire burned away the dark magic that had been sustaining him for decades. "Professor Martinez, get the others out," I commanded, my voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond the physical realm. To his credit, Martinez didn't hesitate. He immediately began shepherding the confused panel members toward the door. "Everyone out now!" Harrison screamed as the cursed ring fused to his finger began eating away at his flesh, the stored souls of his victims finally breaking free from their bindings. The air filled with translucent figures. Sarah Chen, Marcus Webb, Jennifer Liu, and dozens of others I didn't recognize. "You have no idea what you've done," Harrison snarled through his pain. "The order is finished," I said simply. The obsidian dagger in his hand began to crack, dark energy bleeding out like infected blood. "I've been hunting your kind across 7 dimensions for 3,000 years. Did you really think a second-rate practitioner and his scared little apprentice could trap me?" Victoria tried to run for the door, but the cursed letter in her purse burst into flames, its backlash knocking her to the floor. She lay there gasping, the stolen portions of my life force being violently ripped from her body and returning to me. "Please," she whimpered. I didn't know what he was. I just wanted the scholarship. I just wanted to win for once. I looked down at her with something that might have been pity if I hadn't remembered dying in a hospital bed while she watched with satisfaction. "You wanted to win," I agreed. "So you chose to murder your best friend, rather than compete fairly. You chose to traffic with forces you didn't understand. You chose to become his accomplice in binding innocent souls to fuel his hunger for power. The celestial symbols I'd drawn on the whiteboard blazed brighter, creating a containment field around the room. Harrison's network of stored magical artifacts began exploding one by one as my presence purified the building. The mirror justice principle, I continued, advancing on both of them. You sought to drain my life to empower yours. You sought to steal my achievements, my future, my very essence. So let me show you exactly what that feels like. I reached out with my power, not to kill. That would have been too quick, too merciful, but to sever their connections to every ill-gotten advantage they'd gained. Victoria's suddenly enhanced knowledge of ancient languages evaporated like mist. Harrison's decades of accumulated power began unravelling thread by thread. But there was more. With my full memories restored, I could see the web of corruption they'd built throughout the university. Dozens of professors bought off or coerced, hundreds of students manipulated or destroyed, an entire generation of brilliant minds crushed to feed one man's ambition. Time to tear it all down. I raised my hand, and every cursed object hidden throughout the campus began to burn. In the Ancient Studies building, Harrison's collection of soul-binding artifacts exploded in sequence. In the administration building, falsified records burst into flames. In dormitories across campus, students who had been under influence magic for years suddenly found their minds clearing. The backlash hit Harrison like a physical blow, sending him crashing into the wall. Decades of stolen life force was being ripped away from him, leaving behind a withered husk that aged visibly with each passing second. "The others will come for you," he gasped through lips that were already turning grey. "The order spans centuries. We have agents in every government, every university, every—" "Had," I corrected. Past tense. "I've been hunting your order systematically, Harrison. You're the last cell on this continent." His eyes widened in horror as he understood. "The disappearances in Berlin, the fire in Moscow, the earthquakes in Tokyo, that was justice," I said simply. "Long overdue." Victoria was sobbing on the floor. Her hands pressed to her head as years of magical enhancement were stripped away, leaving her with nothing but her own mediocre abilities and the crushing weight of what she'd done. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Elena, please, I'm sorry." "You're sorry you got caught," I replied. "You're sorry your plan failed. But you're not sorry you tried to murder me. Even now, you're only thinking about yourself." I could have killed them both with a thought. It would have been easy, justified even. But that wasn't why I was here. I was a guardian. My purpose was protection, not vengeance. Instead, I wove a different kind of spell, one that would ensure that they could never harm another innocent soul. Harrison would live, but stripped of all magical ability and marked with a celestial brand that would warn others of what he was. He would spend his remaining years in a psychiatric facility, raving about supernatural forces that no one would believe. Victoria would also survive, but she would carry the weight of every soul Harrison had claimed through her actions. She would see their faces in her dreams, hear their voices in quiet moments, feel their pain as if it were her own. She would never again be able to harm another person without feeling their suffering multiplied tenfold. It was, in its own way, a more complete justice than death could provide. As the celestial fire finally burned itself out, Professor Martinez cautiously opened the door. The other panel members huddled behind him, staring in shock at the charred remains of what had been a conference room. "Elena?" Martinez called softly. "Are you—" I turned to face them, and I knew they could see the truth now. The human disguise I'd worn for 20 years was finally unnecessary. "I'm exactly what I've always been," I said. "Someone who protects people from things like this." Over the following days, the full scope of Harrison's network came to light. Federal investigators found evidence of academic fraud, embezzlement, and multiple cold case disappearances stretching back decades. Victoria's confession, given in a state of complete mental breakdown, provided the final pieces of the puzzle. The Blackthorn Scholarship was awarded to Marcus Chen, Sarah's younger brother, whose brilliant work on sustainable energy had been overlooked while Harrison's influence focused attention on less worthy candidates. I declined the scholarship, of course. Elena Vasquez's part in this story was ending. Professor Martinez found me in the library 3 days later, sitting in the same spot where Victoria had first handed me the curse letter. "I've been reading about the Guardians," he said, taking the seat across from me. "Ancient texts, mythology, religious documents, they all tell the same story. Beings of light who protect humanity from supernatural threats." "And what do those stories say happens next?" I asked. "They say the Guardians never stay in one place long. They say once their work is done, they move on to where they're needed most." I nodded. He understood. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. "Probably not," I admitted. Elena Vasquez was a good life, but it was never meant to be permanent. There are other threats out there, other innocents who need protecting. Martinez pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. "Then, take this. Everything I've compiled on similar cases around the world. Places where brilliant students have mysteriously died or disappeared." I accepted the folder with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Professor, for everything." That night, I stood on the dormitory roof where I'd spent 3 years as Elena Vasquez. The city spread out below me, lights twinkling like terrestrial stars. My work here was finished, but I knew there were other battles waiting. As I prepared to leave, I opened my hand and let Eleanor's student ID card flutter away on the night wind. By morning, the records would show that Elena Vasquez had transferred to another university. Her friends would remember her fondly, but not urgently. The truth of what she'd really been would fade into campus legend. Victoria would spend the rest of her life carrying the weight of her choices, seeing the faces of Harrison's victims in her dreams. Harrison himself was already being transferred to a psychiatric facility, his mind broken by the loss of the stolen power that had sustained him for decades. The university would rebuild, stronger and cleaner than before. Students would walk between buildings, laughing with friends, worrying about exams and futures they assumed were guaranteed. They would never know how close they come to having it all stolen away. And that was exactly how it should be. The next morning, students would find a new inscription carved into the library's stone facade, written in a script no earthly scholar could translate. "The light endures, the guardians watch, the innocent are protected." Elena Vasquez was gone, but her love for humanity, her determination to protect the innocent, all of that lived on in me. Victoria had thought she was handing me a death sentence when she gave me that cursed letter. Instead, she had awakened something far more dangerous to those who prey on humanity's light. I had died as Elena Vasquez, but I had been reborn as Celestine, guardian of the seventh seal. The hunt would continue.